You might want to think twice before you decide who I am." The words didn't come out loud at first. They lived quietly behind Naomi Carter's steady gaze as red and blue lights washed over the inside of her car, flickering across the dashboard like a warning. She had seen her whole life in different forms. The road was nearly empty, a long stretch of asphalt just outside city limits, the kind of place where time slowed and assumptions sped up. And in the rearview mirror, the patrol vehicle sat angled just enough to block any easy exit, its headlights cutting sharp, white lines through the night air. Naomi placed both hands calmly on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed, posture straight, her breathing even, as if this moment had been rehearsed 1,000 times in silence. Gravel crunched under approaching boots, deliberate, confident, the sound carrying authority before a single word was spoken. The knock on her window came firm but not rushed, a rhythm that expected obedience, not conversation. She rolled it down halfway, cool air slipping into the car, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic and something heavier, expectation, license and registration. The officer said, voice clipped, already certain of the script, already certain of her place in it. Naomi reached slowly, deliberately, retrieving her wallet, her movements precise, controlled, aware that every inch mattered, every second observed. The officer's flashlight traced her hands, her face, the interior of the vehicle, lingering just a second longer than necessary, as if searching for confirmation rather than truth. Behind him, another officer circled the car, eyes scanning, posture loose but watchful, like this was routine, like she was routine. Naomi handed over the documents without a word, her eyes lifting briefly, meeting his for just a fraction of a second, long enough to register, not long enough to challenge. The silence stretched, not empty, but loaded, filled with unspoken conclusions being drawn in real time. The officer glanced at the name, then back at her, a flicker of something passing through his expression, dismissal, maybe curiosity, but not recognition. "Step out of the vehicle," he said, tone unchanged, as if the decision had already been made before the stop even began. Naomi paused for half a heartbeat, not in hesitation, but in awareness, as if marking the exact moment a line was crossed. Then she complied, opening the door slowly, stepping out into the flashing lights that painted the pavement in shifting colors, her shadow breaking and reforming with each pulse. The air felt cooler outside, sharper, the kind that made everything clearer. She stood beside the car, hands visible, posture calm, while the second officer moved closer, watching, waiting, saying nothing. Somewhere in the distance, a radio crackled faintly, a voice half heard, half ignored. Naomi's eyes moved once more, from badge to badge, from face to face, quietly taking note, quietly remembering. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't resist. She simply stood there, grounded, present, as the weight of assumption settled around her like fog. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like time held its breath, waiting for something unseen to shift. The officer took his time looking over Naomi's license, turning it slightly under the beam of his flashlight as if the angle might reveal something the name itself did not, his jaw tightening just enough to signal doubt rather than certainty. "Naomi Carter," he read aloud, not asking, just placing the name into the night like a test, while the second officer leaned closer to the open driver's side, glancing across the seats, the console, the floor, searching for something that justified the tension already built around her. Naomi stood still, the soft wind brushing against her jacket, her gaze steady but not confrontational, the kind of calm that did not beg to be understood, only observed. "You in a hurry tonight, Miss Carter?" the first officer asked, though his tone suggested the answer would not change anything. She shook her head once, slow, controlled. "No, officer," her voice even, measured, the words landing without weight but without weakness. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, louder this time, a dispatcher's voice cutting through with routine chatter, codes and updates that filled the silence without resolving it. The officer ignored it, handing her license back with 2 fingers, not quite careless, not quite respectful, just enough distance to keep the moment uneven. "Step over here," he said, gesturing toward the front of the patrol car, where the flashing lights painted the hood in pulses of red and blue, each reflection bending across the metal like shifting lines. Naomi complied without hesitation, moving with quiet precision, her footsteps soft against the gravel, her posture unchanged. She could feel their attention follow her, not just watching what she did, but how she did it, measuring calm against expectation. The second officer circled behind her, not close enough to touch, but near enough to be felt, his presence filling the space she did not occupy. "We had a report," he said, almost casually, though the words carried weight without detail. "Vehicle matching this one. Same area," he added, leaving the rest unsaid, as if the silence itself would complete the accusation. Naomi's eyes lifted slightly, not toward them, but toward the horizon beyond the lights, where the road disappeared into darkness, and for a brief moment, her reflection caught in the windshield of the patrol car, fractured by the strobing colors. She took a slow breath, steady, deliberate, as if aligning herself with something internal rather than external. "I understand," she replied, her tone unchanged, offering acknowledgement without agreement. The officers exchanged a glance. Quick, subtle, the kind that spoke in assumptions rather than words. One of them shifted his weight, adjusting his stance, his hand brushing lightly against his belt, not in threat, but in habit, in routine shaped by repetition. "You mind if we take a look inside the vehicle?" the first officer asked, though the question felt more like a step already taken than one awaiting permission. Naomi paused again, just long enough for the moment to register, for the pattern to reveal itself fully, then gave a small nod, not out of submission, but clarity. "Go ahead," she said, her voice calm, steady, unshaken, as they moved back toward her car, opening doors, scanning surfaces, speaking in low tones to each other. Naomi remained where she was, standing beside the patrol car, the flashing lights reflecting in her eyes, her expression unreadable but focused, as if she were not the subject of the moment, but the one quietly recording it. And somewhere beneath the surface of it all, beneath the routine, beneath the assumption, something unseen was beginning to take shape, something the officers could not yet recognize, but had already set in motion. The interior light of Naomi's car flickered on as one of the officers opened the passenger door, illuminating the quiet order inside. A neatly folded jacket on the back seat, a slim notebook tucked into the center console, nothing out of place, nothing rushed, the kind of space that reflected intention rather than carelessness. The officer leaned in slightly, scanning with his flashlight, his movements slower now, less certain, as if the absence of what he expected was beginning to create its own kind of tension. "Clean," he muttered under his breath, though the word carried more confusion than approval. The second officer moved to the driver's side, checking compartments, lifting the edge of a document folder, pausing when he noticed the thickness of it, the weight of something official inside. He glanced toward his partner, a brief look that asked a silent question, then opened it just enough to see the edge of a printed seal, bold and precise against the paper. He did not pull it out. Not yet. But the air shifted slightly, subtle, almost invisible, like the moment before a realization fully forms. Back by the patrol car, Naomi remained still, her hands resting loosely at her sides, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady, as if the passing seconds belonged to her rather than to them. The flashing lights continued their rhythm, casting alternating colors across her face, red, then blue, then red again, each reflection catching in her eyes but never changing there. Calm, she listened, not just to their words, but to the pauses between them, the hesitation beginning to creep into their movements. "You find anything?" the first officer called out, his voice no longer as sharp, now edged with something quieter, less certain. There was a pause before the response came, longer than before. "Just documents," the second officer replied, his tone lowered, measured, as if choosing his words more carefully than he had a minute ago. He stepped back from the car, holding the folder now, not fully open, but no longer hidden, his gaze shifting briefly toward Naomi before returning to his partner. The first officer walked over, taking the folder, flipping it open under the glow of the patrol lights, his eyes scanning. Quickly at first, then slowing, his brow tightening as details began to settle into place. The paper reflected the light differently, official, structured, not something easily dismissed or explained away. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the patrol engine and the distant whisper of wind moving across the open road. Naomi watched them, not with anticipation, not with fear, but with a quiet awareness, as if she had already seen this moment unfold long before it arrived. The officer's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his shoulders lowering just a fraction, his grip on the folder adjusting. The confidence that had guided his earlier commands now interrupted by something he could not immediately reconcile. He glanced up at her again, this time longer, studying her face with a different lens, one that questioned instead of concluded. "Where are you headed tonight?" he asked. The question softer now, less about control, more about understanding, though it came too late to change what had already been set in motion. Naomi's gaze met his, steady, unshaken, downtown. She answered simply, her voice carrying the same calm it had from the beginning, unchanged by the shift around her. The officer nodded once, slowly, as if processing more than just her answer, then looked back down at the document in his hands, the weight of it settling deeper with each passing second. And in that quiet space between certainty and realization, something inside the moment began to turn, not loudly, not suddenly, but enough that nothing about the next few seconds would feel the same. The officer's thumb lingered on the edge of the document, not turning the page, not closing it. Either, caught in a narrow space between instinct and doubt, while the flashing lights continued to pulse across the paper, distorting the official seal with every shift of color. He cleared his throat quietly, almost as if to reset the moment, then looked up again, his eyes searching Naomi's face for something that matched what he was beginning to suspect, but her expression remained unchanged, calm, steady, giving nothing away and yet revealing everything in its stillness. "Where did you say you were coming from?" he asked, though she had not said it before, the question forming out of habit rather than necessity, as if returning to routine might restore the ground beneath him. Naomi's gaze did not move. "From the North District," she replied, her voice even, precise, the words landing with quiet weight. The second officer shifted beside him, glancing again at the open folder, then at Naomi, then back to his partner, the unspoken tension between them tightening just enough to be felt. "North District," he repeated softly, as if testing the phrase, as if it carried more meaning than it should. The first officer exhaled slowly, flipping the page at last, his eyes scanning more carefully now, each line pulling him further away from the certainty he had started with. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, sharper this time, the dispatcher's voice clearer. "Unit 417, confirm status." The words cutting through the air with routine urgency, but now they sounded different. Heavier, like they belonged to a moment that had already changed. He reached for the radio instinctively, pressing the button, but hesitated before speaking, his eyes flicking once more to the document in his hand. Naomi watched the hesitation, not reacting, not rushing, simply allowing the silence to stretch, to reveal itself. "Stand by." He replied finally, his voice lower than before, controlled but no longer firm. The second officer stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You see that?" he asked quietly, though the question did not need an answer. The first officer gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, then closed the folder halfway, not fully, as if unsure whether to hide it or hold on to it. He looked at Naomi again, longer this time, really looking, as if seeing her for the first time instead of the version he had already decided on. "Ma'am," he began, the word catching slightly, unfamiliar in his mouth after the tone he had used before. "Is there anything you want to tell us?" The question hung in the air, open, uncertain, no longer an accusation but not yet an understanding. Naomi took a slow breath, the night air cool against her skin, the lights reflecting softly in her eyes. And for a brief moment, everything seemed to narrow to this single point, this single decision. She tilted her head just slightly, not in defiance, not in submission, but in clarity, as if aligning the truth with the exact moment it needed to be spoken. Her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, and impossible to misread. "You might want to call this improperly," she said, each word measured, deliberate, leaving no room for interpretation. The officers froze, not in motion, but in thought, the meaning settling in before the full realization had time to catch up. The radio crackled again in the background, waiting, the open line hanging between what had been and what was about to become something entirely different. The words settled into the space between them, quiet but undeniable, and for a moment no one moved. Not the officers, not Naomi, not even the flickering rhythm of authority that had filled the air just minutes ago. The first officer glanced down at the radio clipped to his shoulder, then back at the document in his hand, as if the two could somehow contradict each other, as if one reality might cancel out the other. The dispatcher's voice returned, sharper now. Unit 417, confirm status, and this time the call did not sound routine. It sounded like a question that demanded an answer. The officer pressed the button slowly, his thumb hesitating just before contact, his posture no longer rigid but uncertain. Dispatch, stand by, he said again. But the words lacked the control they once carried. Beside him, the second officer shifted his stance, his earlier confidence replaced by something quieter. Something that did not know where to look, his gaze moving from Naomi to the patrol car, then back again, as if searching for a version of the moment that made sense. Naomi remained still, her presence unchanged, grounded, patient, as though she had already allowed this moment to unfold to its natural conclusion. The wind moved softly across the open road, carrying the faint scent of asphalt and distance, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel larger than it was. The first officer opened the folder again, this time fully, his eyes scanning with deliberate care, reading not just the words but the authority behind them, the signatures, the seal, the unmistakable clarity of something official that could not be explained away. His jaw tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in recognition. This says, he began, then stopped, the sentence unfinished, because finishing it would mean saying it out loud, making it real. The second officer leaned in just enough to see, his breath slowing as the meaning settled in, not all at once, but piece by piece, like a puzzle that had been assembled in reverse. Naomi watched them without urgency, her gaze steady, her expression calm, offering no reaction, no satisfaction, only presence. The radio crackled again, the dispatcher's voice now edged with expectation. Unit 417, respond. And this time the silence that followed felt heavier than any answer. The first officer swallowed, his grip on the folder tightening slightly before he closed it carefully, almost respectfully, as if the paper itself required a different kind of handling now. He looked at Naomi again, not as a subject, not as a situation, but as a person whose place in this moment had been entirely misunderstood. Ma'am, he started, the word coming more naturally now, though it carried a weight that had not been there before. We need to clarify something. But even as he said it, the truth was already clear. Naomi tilted her head just slightly, her eyes steady, her voice calm and precise as ever. Go ahead, she said, not inviting, not challenging, simply allowing the moment to continue. The officer glanced once more at his partner, a brief exchange passing between them, unspoken but understood, the shift complete. Now, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. He reached for the radio again, this time without hesitation, pressing the button with a steadiness that came not from control, but from acceptance, and as the line opened, the air itself seemed to pause, waiting for what would come next, waiting for the moment when everything that had been assumed would finally be spoken into something real. The radio line stayed open for a fraction longer than it should have, a thin thread of static stretching across the silence. And when the officer finally spoke, his voice had changed, not louder, not softer, but stripped of the certainty that had filled it before. Dispatch, confirm assignment for Captain Naomi Carter. Each word deliberate, measured, as if saying it correctly might somehow stabilize the moment. There was a pause on the other end, brief but unmistakable, the kind that carried recognition before confirmation, and then the reply came, clear, official, leaving no space for interpretation. Unit 417, that is correct. Captain Carter is assigned to your district effective immediately. The words landing with quiet finality, echoing just enough through the open air to settle into every corner of the scene. The first officer did not move right away, his hand still on the radio, his gaze fixed somewhere between the patrol car and the ground, as if recalibrating everything he thought he understood just minutes ago. Beside him, the second officer straightened subtly, his posture adjusting without instruction, his earlier casual stance replaced by something more rigid, more aware, though he said nothing. Naomi remained where she was, her presence unchanged, her calm not shifting with the revelation, as if this truth had always existed regardless of whether it had been acknowledged. The flashing lights continued to pulse, but now they felt different, less like control, more like exposure, each reflection illuminating not just the scene, but the weight of what had just unfolded. The first officer lowered his hand slowly from the radio, his fingers brushing against the edge of the folder still tucked under his arm, and for a moment he seemed to consider something, perhaps what to say, perhaps how to say it. But the words did not come easily. He stepped forward half a pace, then stopped, the distance between him and Naomi suddenly more significant than before. "Captain," he began, the title unfamiliar, careful, carrying both recognition and the echo of everything that had preceded it. Naomi's eyes met his, steady, not unkind, but not dismissive either, simply present, allowing him to continue. He exhaled quietly, the sound barely audible over the hum of the patrol engine. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," he said, though even as he spoke, the phrase felt insufficient, too small to hold the full shape of what had happened. The second officer shifted again, his gaze dropping briefly before returning to Naomi, his expression more contained now, more aware, as if understanding had settled in without needing to be spoken aloud. Naomi tilted her head slightly, the movement subtle, her voice calm when she responded. "I noticed," she said, not accusing, not forgiving, just stating a fact that did not require emphasis. The night air moved softly around them, carrying the quiet of the road, the distant hum of a passing car far beyond the lights, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, as if the scene itself was waiting to see what would come next. The first officer nodded once, slowly, the motion controlled but waited, his grip on the situation no longer anchored in assumption, but in something far less certain. He glanced toward the patrol car, then back at Naomi, as if recognizing that the authority he thought he held had shifted without warning. And in that stillness, with the truth now fully spoken and heard, the moment did not explode or collapse. It simply settled, heavy and undeniable, leaving behind a quiet that could not be undone. The silence did not break. It deepened, settling into the space between them like something that could not be ignored or undone. And for the first time since the lights had appeared in Naomi's mirror, the balance of the moment had shifted completely, not with force, not with volume, but with truth. Officer Reeves straightened fully now, his shoulders pulling back as if posture alone could restore something that had already slipped away, his eyes no longer scanning for answers, but holding steady, fixed on Naomi with a new awareness that replaced assumption with recognition. The second officer mirrored the shift, stepping back half a pace, giving space without being told, his hands resting at his sides, no longer hovering, no longer anticipating. The flashing lights continued to cycle, but they felt distant now, almost irrelevant, as if the authority they represented had been quietly transferred to the person standing in front of them. Naomi took a small step forward, not to close the distance, but to redefine it, her presence calm, composed, her gaze steady as it moved from one officer to the other, not searching, not accusing, simply seeing. "Tell me what you observed," she said, her voice even, controlled, carrying neither anger nor softness, just clarity. The question hung in the air, simple on the surface, but heavy beneath it, requiring more than a routine answer. Reeves hesitated for a fraction of a second, then responded, his tone careful, deliberate. "We received a report of a similar vehicle in the area," he began, the words sounding rehearsed but now stripped of confidence, "and initiated a stop based on that description," he added, his eyes holding hers, not looking away. Naomi nodded once, slow, acknowledging the statement without validating it, her expression unchanged. "And what confirmed your suspicion?" she asked, the follow-up landing. With quiet precision, the second officer shifted slightly, his gaze lowering for a moment before returning. while Reeves exhaled softly, the answer not as immediate this time. The vehicle matched the description. He repeated, though the repetition made it sound thinner, less complete. Naomi held his gaze, the pause stretching just long enough to reveal the gap between protocol and perception, between what was stated and what was assumed. The wind moved again, brushing across the roadside, carrying the faint rustle of dry grass and distant highway noise, grounding the moment in something real beyond the flashing lights. Descriptions are starting points, Naomi said calmly, her voice steady. Measured, not conclusions. And the words settled into the space between them with more weight than volume. Neither officer spoke, the lesson not delivered as a reprimand, but as a reality they could not avoid. Reeves nodded slowly, the movement small but genuine, his earlier certainty replaced by something quieter, more reflective. Understood, Captain, he said, the title clearer now. No hesitation in it, just acceptance. Naomi's gaze softened just slightly, not in approval, but in acknowledgement that the shift had occurred. She turned her head briefly toward her car, still open, still illuminated, then back to them, her posture unchanged. Finish what you started, she said, not as a command, but as a standard, her tone leaving no room for shortcuts or assumptions. The officers exchanged a brief glance, then moved with renewed precision, their actions now deliberate, careful, each step measured against the weight of the moment. And as they continued, the scene no longer felt like a stop on a quiet road, but something else entirely, something that would not be forgotten, not because of what was said, but because of what had been revealed in the silence between every word. The movement around the car became quieter, more precise, as if every action now carried weight beyond the task itself. The second officer closing the passenger door carefully, not with the casual push from before, but with a controlled motion that acknowledged the shift in the air. Officer Reeves stepped back from the open driver's side, his flashlight lowering slightly, no longer searching for something to confirm suspicion, but ensuring that what had been done was complete, correct, accountable. Naomi remained still near the front of the patrol car, the flashing lights reflecting across her face in steady rhythm, her expression unchanged, composed, present, as though she had not moved at all since the moment began, even though everything else had. Vehicle is clear, the second officer said quietly, his voice no longer carrying assumption, only fact, and the words seemed to settle into the space with a kind of finality that had been missing before. Reeves nodded once, closing the last door with care, then turned fully toward Naomi, the distance between them unchanged, but the meaning of it entirely different. He drew a slow breath, as if measuring the words before they formed. Captain Carter, he said, the title steady now, grounded. We appreciate your patience. The sentence formal, but carrying something beneath it, something closer to acknowledgement than routine. Naomi's eyes met his, steady and clear, her posture unchanged, not accepting praise, not rejecting it, simply holding the moment as it was. Patience is not the standard, she replied calmly, her voice even, measured. Professional judgment is. And the words did not rise, did not press, but they landed with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. The officers stood still, absorbing it, not as correction, but as truth, something that could not be dismissed or redirected. The radio crackled softly again, distant now, no longer demanding attention, just a reminder of the world continuing. Beyond this stretch of road, Reeves nodded slowly, the movement deliberate, his earlier confidence replaced with something more grounded, more aware. Understood, he said, and this time the word carried weight, not just agreement, but recognition. The second officer glanced briefly at Naomi, then away, not out of avoidance, but out of respect, his posture straight, his stance no longer casual. Naomi shifted her gaze toward her car, the interior lights still on, casting a soft glow across the seat. The open space now waiting to be returned to its quiet state. She took a step toward it, then paused, turning back once more, not to extend the moment, but to define it. You had information, she said, her tone calm, precise, but you moved as if you already had a conclusion, and the sentence rested between them, not as accusation, but as a line that had been crossed. Neither officer responded immediately, the silence itself becoming the answer, the acknowledgement. Naomi gave a small nod, not of approval, but of completion, as if the moment had reached exactly where it needed to be. She turned fully then, walking back toward her car with measured steps, the gravel shifting softly beneath her shoes, the flashing lights trailing behind her, no longer the center of the scene. Reeves watched her for a second longer than necessary, then reached for the radio again, his movements slower now, more deliberate, as if each action required intention rather than habit. "Dispatch," he said quietly, his voice steady but changed, situation resolved. And the words felt different this time, not just a report, but a reflection of something learned, something that would not leave as easily as it arrived. The night settled back into itself as Naomi reached her car, the door opening with a soft sound, the interior light illuminating her once more, and for a moment, everything was still, not empty, but complete, carrying the weight of what had just been revealed without needing another word. Naomi settled into the driver's seat, the interior light casting a soft, steady glow across her hands as they rested briefly on the steering wheel, her fingers still, composed, as if the moment outside had not disturbed the rhythm within. She closed the door gently, the sound quiet but final, and for a second she did not start the engine, did not move, simply sat there, the faint hum of the patrol car behind her blending with the distant whisper of the road ahead. In the rearview mirror, the flashing lights continued their cycle, red, then blue, then red again. But they no longer held the same presence, no longer defined the space the way they had before. Outside, Officer Reeves stood near the front of his vehicle, posture upright, hands resting at his sides, his gaze following Naomi's car not with suspicion, but with a kind of awareness that had not existed minutes earlier. The second officer remained a step behind, quieter, his stance steady, both of them now part of a scene that had shifted beyond routine. Naomi exhaled slowly, her breath controlled, measured, then reached forward and turned the key, the engine coming to life with a low, steady sound that filled the car with something grounded, something certain. She adjusted the mirrors slightly, not to watch them, but to align her view forward, toward the road that stretched ahead into darkness. For a brief moment, her eyes lingered on the reflection, not of the officers, not of the lights, but of herself, centered, calm, unchanged. Then she placed the car in drive, the tires rolling forward over the gravel with a soft, deliberate motion, each inch carrying her away from the moment without erasing it. Behind her, the patrol car remained still, its lights continuing to flash, but now they illuminated something different, not authority in action, but authority reconsidered. Reeves lowered his gaze slightly, then lifted it again, watching as Naomi's vehicle merged back onto the road, her taillights growing smaller with each passing second, steady and unwavering. The radio on his shoulder crackled softly, a routine update breaking the quiet, but he did not respond immediately, not because he was unsure, but because he understood that not every moment required words. Beside him, the second officer shifted his weight, glancing once more at the empty stretch of road where the car had been, then back at Reeves, a silent question passing between them, not about what had happened, but about what it meant. Reeves inhaled deeply, the night air cool against his face, carrying with it the weight of something learned without being taught, something that would remain long after the lights were turned off. He reached up at last, pressing the radio with a steady hand, his voice calm, grounded. "Unit 417, clear," he said, the words simple, but carrying a depth that had not been there before. The dispatcher acknowledged, the line closing with a soft burst of static, and the silence that followed felt different, not empty, but full, like a space that had been cleared for something new. The flashing light slowed, then stopped, leaving the road in darkness once more, lit only by the distant glow of Naomi's car disappearing into the horizon. And in that quiet, with no audience, no announcement, and no need for either, the moment settled into memory, not as a confrontation, but as a correction, a shift that could not be undone, carried forward in the stillness of a road that looked the same, but was no longer seen the same way.